Welcome to Ruby Thursday. I'm Melissa Wanish. In this recording of the NYC Ruby Roundtable, Matthew Jordan leads a discussion about machining JavaScript applications for Rails, especially changing our mindset to component development, which works better with Angular and React. We have a new sponsor. This event took place on December 9th, 2015 at Thoughtworks. Here's a little bit about Thoughtworks. Thoughtworks is an international software company and a community of passionate, purpose-led individuals. We think disruptively to deliver technology to address our clients' toughest challenges while maintaining our social mission. We seek to revolutionize the IT industry and create positive social change. We hope you enjoy this recording. If you have any questions or want to add to the discussion, please leave a comment below. Thanks, and enjoy this recording of the NYC Ruby Roundtable.
Okay, sorry for today. Thank you all for coming. I don't know if this is working. I'll just talk loud.
I'll just repeat everything you say.
No. So, hi, my name is Melissa. I'm founder of Ruby Thursday.
Hi, Melissa.
Hi. A tutorial site for junior Rails devs. And I'm here with Matt Jordan, founder of Ruby Roundtable, for the second installment in composing eloquent JavaScript.
Sure. Yeah.
Why not?
It's a working title. So, bringing modern JavaScript to current Rails development.
Yes. So, awesome, you guys. This is a round table, so feel free to interrupt, raise your hand, say, hey, I don't know what that means. Or, what is that? Say it again. Anything like that. So, let's get started.
Cool. How's everybody doing?
Great.
Sweet. How many of you happen to be at the first talk? So a handful of you. I'd like you all to summarize. So last time we had talked about how JavaScript is currently treated in Rails, and the differences, the disparity between that and current frameworks in JavaScript, and the future of that particular language in those frameworks. So, hello? Better? We're good? Okay, cool. Sorry. So, for the most part, Rails does not treat JavaScript right, currently. And by that I mean it hasn't caught up with the current best practices within JavaScript, frameworks, packaging, dependencies, etc. And what we can do to change that. There's great places to meet in the middle. And I think the biggest problem with JavaScript in Rails currently is that it is treated like style and like views and like presentation rather than actual code for the most part. You do have some places, the default scaffolds that they give you do not emphasize that you should test your JavaScript in unit testing. Does not emphasize anything. The only place that people actually do JavaScript testing in most Rails apps by default is in a feature test, which is a horrible place to test JavaScript, because then you're testing all of the code rather than a simple interaction or function within JavaScript. So that brings us to today, where we're going to talk about some of the new frameworks that are emerging, where JavaScript is going, and how we can make our Rails applications machined toward acquiescing those frameworks. For the most part, we're going to be talking about React.js and Flux type components. But that shouldn't be too much of a problem or a hurdle for anyone who's into Angular, or at least the future of Angular, because Angular 2 and Angular Dart along with web components and things of that nature, Polymer, all of those things are all going to the same place. Okay? So thank you all for coming. And why is there no just button to advance us through? Space? Page down? The Mac doesn't have it. Then that takes up both my displays. And that's awful. Poor design. But it doesn't matter. It's neither here nor there. Important thing is actually this is awful. Oh, I see. There we go. So this, yeah, this, and slide, skip slide. That's sort of what I want, right? Nope. Oh well.
If you hold the F and down key on the keyboard, that should keep it down.
Hey! Points. Sweet. Yay! Slides. Alright, so thank you all for coming. My name is Matthew Jordan. I am a consultant with Cyrus Innovation. We're a New York company that does agile consulting in a variety of engineering frameworks for a variety of sizes of companies. So we're definitely looking for great, bright engineers. We have amazing projects that we're working on and some new initiatives that are very much focused on this area. So we'd love to talk to you about that. We'd also like to thank the host, Thoughtworks, for providing us with the space.
Oh.
I'm certain they're hiring.
She took a break. The audio's now working, so yay!
I'm certain they're hiring, but she's not here to say it, so come see me first. And also, if your company is looking for any type of backfilling as far as agile reinforcement, getting a team together and getting your code and your best practices in line, we can definitely help with that. So yeah, JavaScript. Who here loves JavaScript? Why?
Love is such a strong word.
It is a strong word, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Tolerate.
Tolerate.
Oh,
Yeah. Hey, how you doing?
Yeah, even that's a strong.
Come, have a seat.
Just checking out.
Okay, cool. Let me know if you want anything in particular. I might be able to cater. Cool. So JavaScript is great, sort of. It's getting way better, right? In the respect that the tools that we've been kind of adding on and hoisting onto JavaScript are becoming part of the language in a lot of respects. Things that you would normally have to do with frameworks like underscore, jQuery, or whatever you use to actually add decent array functionality or interesting composition to your JavaScript are with ES6 becoming part of the language. It's great, fantastic. It's also giving us some tools to build out good solid objects, which is great too, because then CoffeeScript will die, which is great. Not that CoffeeScript is bad. But it'd be better if that type of syntax were built into the language and treated as a first-class citizen. Now that we have a little bit of the preliminaries covered, that's what we're going to talk about. Trigger warning, I'm going to be talking about solid principles, object-oriented design, software engineering and things that aren't sexy. I'm old, so if you need time to gather your things, please. Otherwise, let's just march right into it. What is common about all of the modern emerging frameworks that I mentioned?
Components.
Yep.
Componentization.
What's that?
Componentization.
Componentization.
You get it.
Yeah. You get your gold star later. What's componentization? What does that mean? It means a lot of things to a lot of different disciplines. What in particular is a web component, and how is that helpful?
It's an encapsulated unit of JavaScript installing in HTML.
Cool. All right. Yeah, that's a good synopsis. So React.js and Flux together, or some type of Flux engine, whether it be Redux or any of the modern state management systems, are a great place to look for this. Angular 2 and Angular Dart have some really bright promise, and have completely destroyed all the dreams and hopes of all of the Angular developers who got very comfortable with the previous versions. I'm so sorry. Polymer, has anyone used Polymer? No? Me neither. Yeah? How is it?
Well, I was wondering about it.
Interoperability, sure, yeah. Well, so the good news is that the type of thing that Polymer is trying to do, and some of the other frameworks, is effectively being looked at and kind of blessed by most of the web consortiums as the next browser default. Okay, which is great. That means that you can learn this and it will actually have a future. Like so little in life. So what is the strength of componentization? Immutable data. Who knows what immutable means?
Can't be changed.
Can't be changed. That sounds awful. Why would I want something that doesn't change?
Security.
Sure. Security. Also a hassle, right? To remember my banking password or like get the authorization app and sync with some things. Hassle, right? Immutability doesn't sound like it's going to help my life.
State management.
State management. What do you mean by that?
I mean, if something's immutable, you don't have to worry about somebody unexpected or something unexpectedly changing something you expect to be in a certain way.
Right. So what we're talking about is immutable data within the component, right? So in that instance of the component, everything you expect to be set in a certain way will stay set in that certain way. And that's great. That's the benefit of immutability. It means that you have assurances that the code you write will not unexpectedly change. Has anyone ever had any code unexpectedly change or behave in a weird way that you did not predict? Yeah. Stink. Not fun. Separation of concerns. Okay. Anybody? What's a concern? That's a weird and loaded word, right? I'm concerned mostly on, whether Jessica Jones is going to be renewed for a second season. Whether what that means for the rest of the Marvel universe, and if I'm going to be able to build enough Lego projects with my daughter this Christmas. Those are my concerns, and I understand why they should be separate from my web development. The boss and clients don't like it. But how is a separation of concern meaningful in this context?
Or functionality.
Okay.
You can
That's right. Yeah.
Exactly.
That's right. I can barely talk myself.
Well,
I shouldn't be. There should be a translator.
Analyze each feature based on the specific area you can expect where things are.
Yes, that's called cohesion. So you have separation of concerns, which is to reduce coupling and increase cohesion. Okay? So cohesion is when things work well together but are not necessarily doing the same thing. An interesting thing about web components and the future of it, we for the past like 10, 20 years have been treating separation of concerns and as web templates and markup should be over here. Style should be over here. Logic should be over here. That's how we separate it. Okay? And that seems like it's an effective separation of concerns, but it's not. Because you don't have cohesion. Cohesion is having a small set of markup working with a specific set of display logic that only affects that markup and whatever style it goes with together.
Are you saying I should have logic in my views?
Yeah.
Sort of. Yeah. Which flies in the face of everything you've learned. Panic. Sort of. And the reason you can have logic cohesively paired with your view is what we're going to talk about with planning out your application for state management and actually working out where that code lives within the component. Okay? There's really good strategies that are emerging for doing that. You definitely should not have a lot of logic controlling a view in a view. If you think this is a license for you to do like 12 nested for and case statements directly in a view component, you're wrong. And we'll talk about that. So separation of concerns, good stuff. Component design starts with a completely blank canvas. In the respect that when you are starting to look at designing a new component, whether it be in Angular, whether it be in React, don't think about all of the minutiae and various user experience changes that you want this set of widgets to control, right? If I were to come to you and start talking to you as a product designer or product manager and say, we need a calendar, event system, and you need to make me this system and give me these views, and just we need to pop and look great and really snap. Yeah, we need it to be lean because whatever that means. Right? And we also need it to do all of these things. They have a list of requirements for the user interaction. Right? Separate that. Throw that out, set it aside for a moment. Concentrate on what exactly you're working with. Okay? You need a event management and calendar display thing. Okay? What does that mean? What are you working with?
Days?
Sure. Yep. And events, right?
Times?
Right. So if you think about it maybe from the perspective of where you came from in Rails, right? Now you're thinking of potentially a RESTful resource, right? Potentially of events. Okay. So you could easily build a very simple RESTful resource that gives you events with whatever base data you need. And that's great, because if you do that first, you get two things. One thing is you get the ability to have an API endpoint immediately from a server, right? So you can serve JSON to whatever you need of a list of your events. a individual display more granularly of a event, right? And some other endpoints that allow you to change data on a remote API, right? Which is great. But more importantly, it gives you a set of JSON, or at least the framework for JSON, for you to immediately take a look at and populate with data. And why is that good? Because that allows us to write our app without any concern about state or anything as far as dealing with an API endpoint. Just concern yourself with the components. It's awesome. So start there. Don't start with everything that's going to be coming at you for. So that's how you should at least start. Reduce the interface to its minimal JSON structure. So we can derive a JSON mock from the structure of your simple Rails resource, or you can just write some JSON. I propose doing both because that gives you a leg up when it comes to the next steps of the integration. So once you have that, you can actually define some of your component structure, because it kind of gives you an idea of what data you have to deal with. How do you define a structure or a hierarchy of components that you would potentially have to make for your user interface for a calendar?
You look up, well, if you have a mock-up already, you can just draw rectangles around all the parts.
Sure. Yep. So you're thinking of a list view of some sort, potentially on an actual calendar display, right? Yeah, which is a pretty good definition of a component. I like to go to one of my personal favorite people to find out how I should define a component structure, and that's by using the magic of the principle of single responsibility. Who knows what that is? Cool. Sandy Metz, one of my favorite Rubyists, who also has been telling young Rubyists and Rails developers some good, solid software engineering principles that have saved their engineering projects, and then gotten really annoyed every time they get really fond of her and ask her again what those things should be. So it warms my heart in so many ways. She's great. You should follow her, read her book, Pooter Principles, no? Practical Object-Oriented Design in Ruby. It's based on some classic works, but it's really well written, except for that bicycle example. You can find other examples. The core concept is good otherwise. Anyway, I'm going to paraphrase a little bit of Sandy Metz here, all right? So applications that have a lot of, let's call them components, should, they should be easy to reuse because you're breaking them into components. So reusability is a concern, and reusable components should be pluggable units of well-defined behavior that have few entanglements. What does that mean? It talks about the changes that you make in a component should not affect another. Okay? So we get back to isolation and encapsulation. Okay? What you really want in life, as I do, is to have code and building code be more like playing with Legos. Right? You have reusable components that you can play with. And if you build everything right and it doesn't entangle itself with side effects and the high-powered train that you've modified under the tree with a far too robust power supply and very amazing engine that replaced the standard Lego engine for the train, should not be a problem as long as your track can handle it, which it can't. But yeah, it should be building blocks, right? You build a component, You should have confidence that that component will not fail. Things around it might fail, or potentially it may be given wrong information and won't be able to complete its job, but that is part of its job. And that's it. So a component that has more than one responsibility, just like a class that has more responsibility, is difficult to reuse. So what does it mean to have a responsibility? What is a responsibility of a component? Let's talk about the calendar view that we're looking at, which is potentially a display of blocks of days, potentially with some events inside of it. So let's just talk about that as a exterior component. Go ahead.
I mean, you might expect the day component to receive some of the data about the events and then render that.
Right. Cool. So the day component, right? We've identified a nested component, right? Rather than the component that displays the entire calendar view, we now have another component that has a single responsibility, which is only, in your definition, to display the events within it, okay? Which is great. That means that this day should not have to be concerned with the month component, as it were. And the event inside of it should not have to be concerned with the actual day. So I'm defining that list of text that's clickable inside of that little box is another component. Okay? It has actual behavior on it as well, and is only responsible for receiving the event and potentially receiving some behavior from its parents, right? That it will go ahead and use to fulfill its obligations, which is only to display and handle whatever it's told to do when clicked. Does that make sense? Yeah? Cool. I don't know if I'm not, if I'm going too slow, just speed me up. So, if you have responsibilities that become coupled, you start doing things like having a day that's clickable, right? And then having it start to manage the modal that pops up, and also whether it should open a new modal, because maybe there's a modal open, or maybe it should close a modal and then open a new one, right? So not the responsibility of the day component, right? Day component should live in isolation, should only be concerned with its own display and its own behavior. Cool. So that's great. How do we know if a component has single responsibility? You may have some components. You might need to evaluate them. You might need to know, is this actually fulfilling a single responsibility role? So Sandy has the whole imposition model, right? Where she pretends it's a sentient being and then asks it things. So a good example of that is asking the calendar, what are your upcoming events? Okay? That might be a perfectly valid responsibility of a calendar or a day. Potentially, what might be less reasonable is calendar. What would be the best time to schedule our holiday party? It's starting to encroach upon some other responsibilities, some other things that are not the responsibility of the calendar. Worse is calendar. What is the capacity of Soldier Field? Now, this sounds kind of ridiculous, but you will find that in a huge amount of event display components and web code, you will find actual code inside of a display component that checks to see if the thing inside of it has capacity. so that it can change behavior to see if it should be disabled on click. Right? It's just silly. Doesn't make sense. So that's a good way to think about designing components. What components mean is to just go back to principles of OO and single responsibility. It's great to see that we're seeing solid back in the conversation, especially when it comes to UX. It's been a long time. Does everyone know what solid means?
What does it mean?
It's a single responsibility, open, closed.
Let's stop substitution.
Yep. What's that?
Oh,
It's like a chess master move, right?
Yeah, it is.
Liskov substitution.
What is that one that sub-children of a parent class should all behave the same way? Has to do with like inheritance and contracts.
Right. Yeah. So, and that's starting to actually get to what we're talking about with events, right, on a day component, right? Those events should be consistently behaved. Interface segregation. Just a fancy way to say, you know, that you should have a contract and it should be consistent. Right, should not change. And dependency inversion, which actually gets a lot more traction in JavaScript. Because they've been actually good frameworks and good code bases have been working on all manner of dependency inversion. What's a good example of that?
Well, what is the difference between dependency inversion and dependency injection? Is injection like one way to accomplish inversion?
Yes. Yeah, that's a good way to say it.
And what other ways are there?
So it depends on the language. If you're, I mean, even the package management systems that have been coming out is part of dependency inversion as well. Requiring all the things that have been coming out help with that at the very least. But version. So dependency injection, you're probably right that we see way more traction on dependency injection than we do inversion. So it just means that you can decouple modules. Okay? So you have policy setting modules at the high level that can define their dependencies. And then you have high level modules independent of their low level components, or low level module implementation details. So I think the principle is high level modules should not depend on low level modules. Both should be dependent upon abstractions, and abstractions should not depend on the details. Details should also depend on abstractions. So it's rather vague and intentional because it depends on abstraction. Okay. So you have layers, patterns, and all of that, but dependency injection is definitely a great way to accomplish it. You have creational patterns, factory method, and factory pattern, all of which are again for object-oriented patterns. Those all accomplish variable instantiation, and that is part of abstraction dependencies. Okay. Methods should not, or no method shall override an implementation method. So that starts to talk about the problems with, potential problems with doing things like monkey patching and the side effects that you can get there. No class should derive from a concrete class. All concrete class packages must connect only through interface or abstract classes. And member variables in a class should be interfaces or abstracts. Those are the core principles, right? Effectively, yeah. So that's just the abstraction dependency notation, and it's probably on Wikipedia as well. But yeah, traditionally, and the more forefront is dependency injection for us. And those are basically one of the hottest things for frameworks these days. Otherwise, you have setter interface and constructor-based injections. So, cool. So that's solid. It's something to live by. It's the best part of object-oriented design, and you should definitely look at those patterns and critique your code, especially when you're planning new code. Okay? It's a great way to work out details. Great. So we've defined somewhat of a component structure, right? We've got some idea of what we want to build. It's fleshed out, clearly. But we've basically reduced responsibility to one thing for each component. Now what?
Do you write some code?
Yeah, we write some code, but no, we don't. First, we write some tests. Right? Everybody writes tests first, right? Sweet! That way you can guarantee to your to the responsible people on your projects that you're doing exactly what they asked for.
No, you figure out what you want to test for before you write the test.
What's that?
You figure out what you want to test for before you write the test.
Sure, yeah. But that's more of a behavioral testing, right? That's when your customer or a lean product person comes to you and tells you exactly what you want to build. I'm talking about good quality code, right, to enable you to do that, which is actually unit tests. Okay? So I'm not talking about when this clicks here, then these 5 things should happen. That's a behavioral test. I'm saying that, hey, I wrote this function. Does it work? Will it fail? If I do the one thing that it's supposed to do, will it be okay? Right? That gives you confidence to deploy it and know that no matter what, that single thing that has one job will not fail. Okay? Has anyone read the React or Thinking in React documentation? Cool. Written by the guy from Instagram who went to Facebook and then cheerleaded all the stuff for React and React Native. I forget his name. Lee, maybe?
Peter Hunt, I think.
Yep.
Somebody said it.
Okay,
Say it
cool.
louder.
All right, well, you get his points or her points. So. Anyway, yeah, Peter Hunt. Good stuff. He basically gives you some idea of how to write and build and design your React app, which has actually been copied by Angular people as well in other articles, thinking about Angular JS and thinking about other frameworks du jour that are working on component-based code. So they suggest that you design from the bottom up or inside out. In our particular fantasy example of a calendar of events, what is the bottom or the inside?
The event.
The event, yes, absolutely. It's the lowest thing on the entire thing. It's the thing that has no children, right? It's the thing that doesn't have anything else inside of it. Start there. And write the simplest test you can. And then you're guaranteed that no matter what happens, that event code is fine. In most applications these days, what you want to do is you want to have a component that receives the data as well as behavior from its parent. In properties and not as state. What's the difference between a property and a state? Property is what you buy on Monopoly, and state
is where it is.
State is, yeah. That's who you pay taxes to. Right? No.
Oh, I was gonna say the props are usually passed down to the component.
Yeah.
And the state is usually, I mean, it's set by the component on, like, usually on initialization, and it's taken from somewhere else.
Right? And that means that it can be immutable.
The state.
No,
Or
props. Sorry. Props can be and should be immutable. You build your component by what's passed to it. It is it's created by what it's told to render and the data that it expects. For in our case, it's going to be given a description, a title, some other interesting data like a location or whatnot, and also potentially a on-click or something to bind to an on-click, a function that's just passed to it that it will just execute whenever anyone clicks on it. Why is that? Why would you want to have a component written with behavior that it does not control or does not actually define?
Single responsibility.
Yep.
Dependency.
And dependency, yeah.
Ooh,
all of these
cohesion.
principles. What's that?
Cohesion.
And cohesion, yeah. And that's very separate from traditionally what we've thought about web apps. We've had all of those things separate, and it's been a big mess. And it's nice to get code that you can be confident in and actually looks great and behaves the way you want. Because as soon as you get like the 1,200 ad providers on that page who are doing like modals and pop unders and other JavaScript things that are going on, you're going to want to make sure that your code is isolated. Because the web stinks. So you want to make sure your code's clean. Cool. So great. You can write a test fairly easily. In Angular, you're going to use things like projector. Yes.
Protractor.
Protractor. Yep. All right. We got like 4 different names for that. That's cool. In React, I use Jest, which is fantastic, but a little tricky because by default it mocks everything, except for when it doesn't. And it won't for child components or other things. So, and it's moving fairly quickly, as is React and everything else. So you have to really be on top of what's going on. But for the most part, all it is, as we talked about last time, is Jasmine. Unit tests. That's all it is. Very simple expectations wrapped in the description that you can initialize a component with only what it needs, that set of limited data in JSON format, and a function, right? And it's going to behave exactly like it's supposed to, period. And you can have guarantees on that automated and have that hooked up to a CI, and every time you deliver new code, you know that, yes, it may not function out there in the wild, but you know that it is not because of the code you wrote for that thing, right? So the problem is elsewhere. So you can find the problem quickly, identify it, and address it. That's more of the point of test-driven development and good continuous integration, is that you have confidence that the code you're delivering works, and therefore you know to identify where the problems are. Right? It's not going to be in the tiny bit of code that's supposed to be displaying and handling the on-click function for this. Cool. So yeah, start with the bottom and then work your way up. Now when you get to the next component, you're going to have a date, right? Which will give some other information, and also receive some properties that are events, which is just an array, right? Now, what do you want that component to do and know about?
it should make the event components that then passes the information about the events. Like each event should be sent into an event component, essentially.
Okay, yep.
Maybe sort them?
Sure, yeah, depending on what you need it to do, yeah. So what would that be? It'd be some type of function that would maybe respond to some type of standard web event, like a drag or a hover or something of that nature, that you can pass from the actual overall component, right? So that's a definition of what behavior might be available in the day, okay? And you're right about its responsibility to the event, but I caution against thinking too much about the event when dealing with the day. All the day needs to care about is that it is receiving a list of events, and it is passing the requisite data that it gets from its props, potentially to augment, which actually should come with the array, right? Maybe with an additional function that it's getting from props from above. So you get an array of events and the actual on-click responsible function, and you make that into a new component. And all it cares about is that it does that, passes it to it, and leaves it to the responsibility of the event. Don't check that the event DOM works after that. Don't check that it renders. Don't check that any of that happens. You don't care. Day doesn't care about the event. It passes responsibility to the event. Okay? Cool? Excellent. And I guess on top of that, what is the month view component responsible for? Sure, yeah. And also receiving from its constructor all of the information that probably is coming from a server in JSON that allows it to compose its child, right? And its child can compose whatever it needs from the data that we pass to that parent, right? So, that's the tricky bit of web components. And now you have hierarchy, right? And that's why it's so important to start from the inside out or the bottom up, right? Because if you started from the top, you're gonna start coding all of the things that the children need, right, to be aware of and look for into the parents, right? And kids, you shouldn't be concerned about. That pull quote, really, right? I love my daughter. Yeah. Just so you know. What's going on the web? Fair. So now we've identified some properties and some ways to compose and build out components. Great. So we talked a little bit about state as well as being distinct from properties. So the next thing that we can do is identify how our UI state is represented. So we said that properties are distinct from state because they are immutable, which means that one definition of our state can be mutability. It's entertaining. I gave trigger warning, so hopefully the warmth in the room and the wonderful conversational style of talking about state management and standard object-oriented design patterns is really sinking into a nice, warm, comforting feeling so that we can all get a good rest tonight. But this is super important if you're going to be building out web components and working through code that, for the most part, is going to be the only thing your client or stakeholder will notice about their application. They don't care about the database, they don't care about anything that goes on. It can all be horribly built. They're going to see the actual user experience, you're going to see when this fails, right? So the fact that we're finally getting to some good patterns for software engineering and frameworks that go with them, and they're fairly devoid of style and design concerns, is awesome. Now we can actually deliver things that we can be proud of from a software engineering perspective, as well as just a style perspective. Stylish things are great, but sometimes they're really poorly built. Right? H&M, you want to say? Right? I don't know fashion. So it's definitely bizarre. All right, so how do we identify the complete but minimal representation of a UI state?
We make static mockups that will land the state, and if there's an element on the page that we know what information to put in.
Hey, we just did that. Sort of. We ignored state, but we just talked about how to identify, test, and build effectively a static model of your component hierarchy.
So we look at the props and all that stuff.
What's that?
We look at the props and all
So props are the message that goes throughout, right, passed to each component to build. And now we can concern ourselves with state, right? We have sort of a static implementation of the web component hierarchy, and now, yes, we can build the static model of the state representation. So how do we determine when something, besides being immutable, because that's a loaded term, and we all know that there's plenty of reasons something should change, and what does it mean to change over time, right? Because every time a component is rendered, it can seem like it's changed, right? But actually it's just a new instance of that component with the props that were sent to it, right? Which is actually immutable. So every time that I say, do something else that re-renders a particular cell in my calendar, right? That will reload and re-render that particular cell, and it will be a brand new component instance with a brand new set of props, probably. That's the only reason you would want to actually re-render anything like that. But not necessarily a different change in state. The change in state would not necessarily be on the component unless something actually needs to change. And how do we determine that? How do we determine statefulness? So here's some rules of thumb. If it's passed in from your parent, right, it's not state. If it changes over time, it could be state, right? Like maybe you have a actual countdown next to one of the events, letting you know that there's only 4 hours left before these tickets are gone. Best example. But that sort of might be state, but it's not, because I can compute it based upon other state or props in my component. So if it can be derived from the knowledge I have, it's not state. Okay?
So would you say, if you had something boring, web is all forms, right? So you have like some text showing you click on something and now it becomes an editable form. Right?
Yeah.
So the thing that is being handled, the thing that says is editing true or false, that is the state on some component, probably the
Yes, it is state on some component.
Right.
And that's an important distinction. It may not be the state of the component that you are supposedly editing.
Right.
Okay? It may be the state of the actual, and probably is the state of the actual input component, right? Which is sort of managed and handled by the actual browser. But in React, you actually have immutable inputs. You know what that means? That means that you have to have an on-change event bound to every input because you are responsible for managing it. Otherwise, people can't actually type things into an input field.
It's terrible.
It's
That's what made me rage
It's
quit React.
deterministic.
That's what made me rage quit React. You broke the web.
Are you serious?
Yes, I was on.
Wow.
I rage quit it so fast.
If I made something that just handled that for you, just gave you,
No.
I don't know, like a generator or something Rails you like, I don't know, some helper that just does that for you.
Don't break the web. All right. Input forms have been around since 1994.
It doesn't break the web. It just actually, it's like a polyfill, right? Bear with me. In that it is setting the actual behavior of the browser intentionally.
Okay.
Yeah. You know, you've been told and you've relished in the idea that you can actually set native-like behavior in a browser yourself and make those things work as if they are intentionally part of the browser, right? And now you're just managing state and mutability in the same way. Yeah, I know, it's really annoying. And it takes you like, I don't know, half an hour or 45 minutes or maybe 5 hours just staring at things and wondering why since I set the value of this input, now I can't change it at all. That's awful. If you don't set values, fine. They can just go ahead and type whatever they want inside. It's that when you initially set a value, now you are putting it in a state in which its internal state must be managed by the application. Okay? Because otherwise, the input field only manages it. And guess what? We start to do stupid things, like binding other events to it, right? And now we're doing a markup conversion on our inputs, so that when we type in markup, it suddenly just displays magically as HTML code, right? And suddenly we're in a far worse place than actually having to manage state. Because now we have to figure out, like, oh, did I do that, or did the browser do that, or what's the point of this new action? Okay. So 3 rules. If it's passed in by the parent, it's props. It's not state. If you can compute it based on what's passed in or what is in other state, then it's not state. Okay. So if it's derived, or if it's props, deliberate. All right, and now we can assign responsibility for managing state. Where do we define responsibility for managing
By
state?
the way, do you still want this slide showing?
Yeah, sorry. Not sure how I want that. Yeah. It's fine. Cool. Yeah, thanks. Who's responsible for my state?
Component?
You are.
And so every component is responsible for its own state. Yeah? Okay.
So
Could
by
be.
state, you just, well,
Yeah.
can it be local state that is in its component?
Yeah, there should be local state, and you are responsible for setting and getting that state in that component. But let's take a look at each piece of state in the application. Right? How do we identify whether something is stateful? So you identify every component that renders something that's based on state change. Okay? So if potentially an event is triggered in which suddenly all of the events on the month of December are sold out. Okay? Now state has to change. Okay? So now rendering has to happen based upon that state, and that could be that the overall month is the thing that handles the state of those of whether those particular events have some degree of clickability, because it's actually the thing that's going to pass down the re-render by changing state on the individual components. Right? The actual component is responsible for its own state. It has to re-render based on it. Right? But again, you're passing and re-rendering the changes from different places. So managing state different than actually where state changes happen. So you can find a common owner component, right, like a month view, a single component above all the other components in the state of the hierarchy. That could be a thing that manages all the months, right? And that can be a great place to manage and define a lot of state, because then you can have a place that will actually do a little bit of what we used to call routing, which still gets called occasionally, although we're moving away from classical controller and routing building metaphors at least. Because again, we need to actually concern ourselves with the component. So either the common owner or another component above it should handle it. If you can't find a component that makes sense to own the state, you can create a separate component that is only responsibility is managing state. Yep. Again, separation of concerns. These are things that, again, if there is a stateful setting that both the calendar month and the day might have to be aware of, you need something to manage that. Right? And that might be another component. And then the last thing that you need to do in order to deliver a design is to identify places where inverse data flow happens. We talked a little bit last time and a few other times about data flow. And React's very dogmatic about data flow, right? They take a principle that one boy band on Earth should manage all of the data flow, right?
One direction.
One direction, right? Yeah. That's all the jokes. That's all I got. So low-level components will need to trigger that state change. Kind of talk about that. So what needs to happen when you actually have to click on something? It's going to receive a on-click event, in which it's going to potentially have to make changes above, like managing a modal. Right? Don't ever write any new applications with modals. We're done with them. Right? It's a good example for the scenario. Modals are awful. The only way you can make modals worse is if you add an iframe in it. Right? Am I wrong? It's just separate from the entire browser experience, and it just hurts your code. And it's just me. Anyway, but to manage like a modal in which you have to do things like manage its state when you're clicking, in some sense. So in that case, you can do simple things like, say I have a button, and I need to put a spinner on it when I click because it takes a long time for that third-party iframe to load from the remote server from wherever we just kind of punted all of that work to in some part of the country where we can pay people $2 an hour. Right? It takes a long time to get that data back, which means that you need a spinner to indicate to the user that everything's cool until the actual modal renders. So the tricky bit is when that modal actually renders, how do you change the state of my button, which happens to live inside of my date? Right? So one simple thing we can do is dispatch events that we listen to on our particular component. Other things that we can easily do is attach a callback to the actual function that we're doing the on-click to, right? That just says reset my state when you're done. You can do that with promises, you can do that with a lot of things. Depending on the framework you're using, you want something to actually trigger that event that is not your component, but it still does the change. Right? It still triggers a set state event, which makes you re-render that button instead of showing that spinner. That way, you can have a very discrete set of events. Click on the button, change it to a spinner, waits for the modal to open. If someone else clicks on a different button while you're waiting, what happens then? These are all things that the individual components should not be concerned about. They should just be able to dispatch those that information and let something else handle its own isolated component structure. So that is that's the bulk of how to design from a component architecture in Angular or React.js. And I'd like to I have a few more things to say about how we can make this work and make this better with Rails. React Rails is okay. There's better things that we can do. I don't know. Allow you to generate some assumptions about your input fields and how they need to have structure. Who knows? That's all things that you could do easily with the generators and gems that will wrap a set of JavaScript. Okay. Questions? Thoughts?
I guess I'm curious, kind of like to the group. What are you guys using for JavaScript now? Are you guys on like on frameworks? Are you doing
YUI? Anybody?
What's that?
YUI?
Yeah.
Huh?
Prototype JS?
Prototype, yes? Yeah.
Scriptaculous maybe?
Ooh, Scriptaculous. No?
Yeah, we use Angular, and I think our plan is to introduce React, which is what's nice about React is that we don't have to choose which direction we want to go. Like, okay, let's start moving towards Angular 2. We can just introduce React components and kind of, continue on. Angular, and it's pretty monolithic at this point, but we can,
Yeah, that's a big change.
By, and wants to relearn Angular. Nicer.
Yeah, it sucked the first time.
Yes.
With Angular?
It's a lot to learn.
Yeah. This is the first time it's been backward broken, though, right?
You're splitting up your app, so there's a React components and Angular components, or using them together, or what?
Use them together.
So here's the thing. React is mostly just the actual web component and view component, right? Without a Flux pattern or a Flux implementation, you don't have the same type of power you have with like Angular. You don't have a full experience. You don't have something managing those events.
So are you rendering? So have you guys got started doing that?
No, this is a group. Yeah, that's a
I'm really
we're
curious.
approaching Angular 2.
So one thing I did.
Gotta do something.
Yeah. Oh, so it's either Angular 2 or React.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, because I know that like Angular is very opinionated about like redrawing the page, so I think you might have to like put your components inside of Angular directives.
With Angular 2.
Yeah, but
sometimes
we're also super, forward thinking, and we're in the process of microservicing our application.
Ooh, sure.
Because that's what's cool. So is React, though. So are modals. I just want to say we have a ton of modals.
Modals kills my family, so
feature with the modal today.
I develop engines.
You just pass it root scope, you move on with your life. It's great. But yeah, so anyways, especially if we can really start to, modularize our app, and we can really be like, okay, this specific part of our app, let's start getting a little creative with how we move from Angular 1 to Angular 2, or start. You can also introduce Angular 2 components in Angular 1, which who knows what they were thinking when they first thought we weren't going to be able to do that. Or we can start trying to use React in one of those areas, so it's not, we don't have this intermingling of our.
They're both great frameworks. I mean, Angular definitely solves different problems. It's way better for just giving you out of the box everything you need for a single page app, right? React, you actually have to make design choices, which, thinking is harder. It is.
Indeed.
Yeah, especially when you just need to crank out a component.
You also have to choose which of the 20 Flux implementations you want to use, right?
What are you using?
Redux.
Sure. I think the choice is pretty clear. Redux is unless you want to actually implement your own.
Yeah.
Right.
It's pretty cool.
That's good.
So the rest of you guys are doing React, I guess, or just vanilla?
React and Redux.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is anyone using Ember?
What?
Is anyone using Ember?
Oh no.
No. I love. I'm like the only one who fucking loves Ember.
Yeah?
Ember
That's
is-
great. There's a huge market for you.
Yeah, that's good.
It's true. In fact, we have some legacy apps.
Yeah.
Yeah, we could totally talk to you about.
I think like it's interesting like talking about like getting JavaScript up and running, like a new project up and running. I think Ember has one of the nicest ways of like starting a project and like a good.
So it's not
ecosystem.
node based?
Well, nothing's perfect. But I think like if you like the things you like from Rails, I think you get a lot of those things from the like Ember ecosystem, which is really nice.
Yeah. Well, it is very much that monolithic framework.
But I mean, their component support is really good. I feel like I'm the only one who defended here, so we can.
I'm not dissing it. It's awesome for what it is, but it is too much for most projects for me. I'm generally introducing those frameworks on projects that are living, right? And that's very hard to do to duplicate the functionality that's there in Ember. Making a transition to me is not like, oh well, we'll just render this component, right, in Ember and everything else in the page traditional.
Or you saying you can't?
You can, but it's harder. Yeah.
So how often would you do that? Would you?
Almost every project that we've introduced, React has some degree of views that we're starting to introduce new work on directly with a component base rather than.
So Ember, I know it doesn't yet have like data down actions up.
No, it does. It does. So with Ember 2, they implemented. So the way Flux handles like actions, sort of like deep inside of it, is it sends. If you use the Flux pattern, it sends like an event. The dispatcher listens to it and kind of like notifies everyone who's interested. They do data down action up by using closure functions. So like your top level component will have the function that it's supposed to know about, and you pass that function down, and it gets called and it's a closure, so it has access to the original parent state. As opposed to having to manage like an event mapping, you're just explicitly passing down what it does on click, on select, on whatever.
Okay, but then
This?
Yeah, so that right there is your Flux.
Yeah. So something like this in which you have an expected directionality of your dispatch events.
With the exception that there's no like explicit dispatcher for events, you're sending functions down as properties to a component.
It's the same thing with
Redux
Redux.
added the event embedder as well.
Okay, so same similar pattern.
Yeah, because basically you don't actually change the state. You just have the old state, you put in a function, you get the new state, and then you can just compare them to see if it actually changed. So you don't need like.
It's a great pattern for just about everything. But if you need to do something super custom, I can see where that might get sticky. Although you can just build your own store and dispatcher on aside from Redux on a component, I suppose. Yeah.
So, well, but I know Ember is planning a new syntax which supports one-way binding better than. So, in what way is the current syntax efficient?
Yeah. So the one-way data binding. So they're at version 2.2, I want to say, and the one-way data binding came out in 2.0. So there have been some changes recently to it.
But I know they're adding Angular back with syntax.
Yeah, so directive syntax. So they're working basically like it's what do you call it? Component syntax, like the official W3C component syntax.
Right.
The only difference
what
now,
Google and Polymer are mostly focused on.
basically, right?
So what will that add?
That would just be like a change in syntax. Right now, what you're doing is like 2 curly braces to like render a component. Eventually, when they get the angle brackets,
Prefer using off that.
it'll be because they're using handlebars or HTML bars. So that wouldn't be a change in much, except for like how you render a component. You would still render them the same way you render them today, with the exception that you have instead of.
So is it backward compatible?
With what?
Like with current, like it would be a amount of work to upgrade.
No. I mean, it would be right now. It would be a change in like the find and replace. You do two.
Really?
Yeah.
Well,
For component
well,
rendering.
they're planning to support the old syntax and eventually you have to ribbon deprecate it eventually.
That's great.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's one thing I do like about why I'm kind of like a fan of Ember. I like they are very cognizant of upgrading and how crazy JavaScript is, as opposed to just like breaking everything. They like the stability without stagnation, kind of like the mantra of the browser, which is like we need to get faster, we need to get better, but we can't break anything.
Yep.
So that's I'm a fan of theirs about it. Like they're very thoughtful. The team is very thoughtful about like introducing new things that match like current standards.
They're some of my favorite people. Seriously. Great developers and an amazing framework. Unfortunately, I hate it. But for personal reasons.
You'll come around.
Yeah. Maybe. We'll see. Pretty in love right now. What else are people using? Anybody using anything outside of those two frameworks? Anybody using Angular previous? The current version of Angular?
How about like just plain
Dart?
JavaScript? Dart style.
Yeah, is anybody using vanilla?
Like just
My favorite
just some
framework.
jQuery, some objects.
Sweet! Right on. How do you handle anything like this? Are you building components out?
Actually, I really have like one big, like jQuery.
One JavaScript file to rule them all?
Not big like jQuery.
Sure. Yeah.
And I'll find another jQuery components. That's really just jQuery components.
So, cool. Were you at the last talk?
Yes.
Cool. I have some documentation that will help you move from jQuery to. I have a series of articles that basically take a Rails app with jQuery and managing everything and move it into a React, possibly Angular 2 framework.
That's awesome. Actually, I like that.
Yeah, it's because it's daunting.
Yes.
Can you like post that in the comments?
I will. Yep. Yeah, I'll have it up tonight or tomorrow morning. Anybody else personal experiences with components or thoughts about moving? Questions on how much of a pain it is? It doesn't come without cost. I mean, there's these are new frameworks. They're moving very fast. There's new changes every couple of weeks in both Angular and React, and obviously in Ember, but they seem like they're fine. In that they are caring more about their user base and not breaking things outright.
I have a kind of general question that's been on my mind. It's the reason why I showed up tonight. It's about basically pulling out components that I normally use in my UI and kind of widgetizing them for syndication on other sites.
Sure.
So, I build these things, they work well on our site, users come and use them, they're happy. And then other people, look at our site, it's like, hey, it's a brand, we want to do that same kind of thing. So we, in essence, whether you want to call it syndicated, you make it an ad unit, whatever you want to call it, but, that's the context. What really goes on at the end of the day is, here's some piece of code that's this component, and then I want to put that piece of code on some other website. But when it's on my site, I have a controller or some other thing.
Or mostly put that code essentially on someone, a unintended client.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah, but what I'm interested in is being able to minimize the footprint whenever I put it somewhere else that's not on my site.
Yep.
Because I don't want to have to deal with all the overhead of things that load on my site. I really want to deliver some very simple packet that has done not much more than get data from my API and then load it into that widget. And I've been trying to think of which library is, I don't want to say best suited, that's maybe silly of a question, but I want to think about the trade-offs between different libraries and how they do it.
I wonder if the Google Closure compiler would do it, because I know it can strip out unused functions, so maybe if you just use your normal library and compile it with that compiler, I don't know if it would be
interesting.
detected.
So it's effectively another minification strategy then.
Yeah.
Although you have to write your code like with explicit exports, so that if you're trying to export something as a global function, it won't think it's unused.
Right. So it should be proper just.
Yeah.
Interesting.
You could also, React supports like higher order components, which is how they implement like drag and drop libraries.
Yep.
So,
And my experiences so far with the shared components, although nothing in production, is pretty good. I'm really enjoying it.
So if someone had written like a component, let's say, they could just say wrap it in your component and give it the functionality that they want without having to actually completely rewrite it. So.
Okay,
But
so
at the least, you're still adding like several hundred K to any delivery of a simple widget, right?
with a React, you mean?
Within any, I think if you're having any type of management framework, I think, I could be wrong, maybe there's a super lightweight one out there. But I would assume that at the very least you're adding that to the client.
I guess this is ultimately my question. You know, I mean, with React, I mean, I'm paying the footprint on React for, you know, a contemporary version on my site, and then as well, because in this case, let's call it an ad unit. I'm not going to presume that they're going to incorporate it on their site, like as they have React and they're going to use it too. So I really got to syndicate this anywhere. So
Sure.
I'm thinking, you know, do I build it in jQuery and then I wrap that inside of a directive on my site, which I'm using Angular today. I could dump Angular for future projects and use some other framework to, you know, slim it down.
Yeah.
Or anything. That's why I'm opening my mouth right now.
So,
Well, also, there's CDNs to consider if you happen to discover that all the sites that are your clients, where it's really common for them to use a certain framework, you could just hope it's already cached and then refer to that.
That's true. So we use a couple of sites that allow you to do A/B testing in a cloud basis in a lot of respects, and you might be familiar with some of them. They allow you to just enter a bunch of JavaScript in this A/B test, and it injects it into the client for those that traffic, and then actually adds functionality. It's a little bit intrusive, but our strategy for that, for the most part, has been vanilla, right? As close to the bare bones as you can get. But on top of that, we're very cognizant about keeping at least those solid principles of single responsibility and isolation, and making sure that everything is unique only to that component or function. Pure functions. Center on that, and you won't have to worry too much, because at the very least you won't have to worry as much about side effects, right? And that's the point of doing props and managing state elsewhere. But I'm not sure about injection for that. What you would want to do about state management or an overall component structure hierarchy. Because half the time you're just tracking clicks and views and managing cookies and showing some ad unit, right? For the most part. That's the only advice I have. Anybody else? Cool. Thanks so much for coming, guys. If you have anything else, let me know. Email me. Email Melissa. I'm sure she'll have a video of this and some additional information up on both the meetup and on Ruby Thursday.
Yes.
Cool. Thank you.
And thank you, Thoughtworks.
Yes, thank you so much.
Yeah, use jQuery there now. Yeah, I know, it's very different. It's like a whole different. So, I'm looking at
Yeah. I have additional material on that.
it's very
Kind of
different.
running over, and
When you're working with Rails, you realize
most of that is just the fact that you can make the choice of whether to shove it to the asset pipeline, right?
you can do it right.
That is just
What do you
That's high element.
yes. So if you're doing that, yes, because what happens a lot,
But do you have any other Ruby projects?
right? Thank you.
Okay.
He's another one that needs and fast.
Oh, you mean remote true? Like,
It was like, nobody was.
That still exists. It's Ajax, right? It's Ajax. I feel like that's a cheat. You know what I mean? It's not. It's like it's not like it feels like you're going around. Yeah, sure. It feels like this is the solution. That's not a solution. That's pretending it's a solution. And like partials.